Hello, and welcome back to Exit Wound. I'm your host, Melanie Thompson. So on our last episode, we talked a lot about trying to fit into the workplace and more on the 9-to-5 lifestyle. We touched on coworker interactions and the fine line between owning your story and having to sing for your supper, so to speak, to prove your worth. And today we're going to expand on the idea of owning your story while maintaining your boundaries. Our story is a key part of activism and advocacy, but it's also a key to healing and rebuilding. Today, I am so happy to be joined by survivor leader Abigail Dow. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
And my guest from my previous episode, Gina Cavallo. How are you?
Good, Melanie.
Thank you for coming back. I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I invited both of you to join me on this episode in particular because I know you guys have really strong feelings about this topic. So I know today's going to be a really, really good episode. You guys excited?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I like that. So for this episode, I want to try something a little different than what we've been doing in previous episodes. Abigail, I've started most of these episodes asking my guests how old they were when they were first trafficked, but I know that not every survivor is comfortable answering those kind of questions. So for our listeners, I want to demonstrate how you would practice answering this question. So role play with me a little bit if that's fine. Mm-hmm. How old were you when you were first trafficked?
So I entered this field when I was 12 years old. So I will answer it like that, or I will answer it like I prefer not to answer.
I love it.
That's I think I've been during this journey. It's been really hard for me to say, I don't have to answer this. Like, period. Like, the person can ask, but I don't have to answer. I think it took me a long time to find that and just to hold on to it, because I felt pressure that I have to answer people's question. When people ask me question that they are entitled to know. It's like, okay, no, you are not entitled to know. It's up to me to say or not say. It's up to me to disclose. I can do that, or I can just say I entered the field of trafficking at 12 years old. That doesn't mean for say I'm disclosing like I'm a survivor of human trafficking. It can be also as someone who's working in the field as well. I may be doing volunteer work. I may be doing whatever the case may be at 12 years old. But I think the fact of owning to tell people, no, I don't want to disclose that. I think that's something that's very near and dear to me, that I able to find that voice.
I love that, because this entire episode, we're going to be talking about boundaries and no's the entire time. So Gina, last episode, we talked about this idea of fear and shame. I believe you called these two feelings your two best friends, if you could remember. And I think that resonates with most of us survivors, these ideas of being stuck between feelings of fear and shame when it comes to telling our stories for the first time. So could you talk a little bit about when you first told your story on your own? Can you remember which parts you chose to disclose and which ones you chose not to?
Oh, I remember as if it was yesterday. I don't want to remember. And one of my stories that I was interviewed for is still out there, and the verbiage is so wrong, and it's nothing that can be you can't undo it. However, yes, I do remember, and it's probably something I wish someone had helped navigate me through it, that I really should not have been doing interviews at the time. But I was so motivated. I was going through counseling. Began my healing journey. However, I didn't have the tools, nor was I equipped to know how to interact with interviews. What I wasn't prepared for were the questions. And I felt at the time that I had to answer the questions. Okay.
So I resonate with that a lot. For me, when I was younger, I was advocating under a pseudonym. I was putting poster boards around my head when I did my first few public interviews. And I remember there was this conflict in me between what I wanted to disclose and what I felt I had to disclose based on whoever was asking me of this information. Would you say that after your first time sharing your story, did you feel any feelings of regret or shame the first time?
I felt regret and shame when I was doing the interview.
Yeah.
Because one of the very first questions, first of all, there was someone with me that had invited me to do the interview and was telling me what I should say, like answering those questions for me.
Gotcha.
So that threw me off right from the start before the interview even started. But then one of the questions that I was asked was, were you a virgin when you were first trafficked?
Oh, gosh.
And I was just so unprepared. I felt so violated. I felt betrayed. I felt that all of these things I didn't even know. And I felt that you were using me now for sensationalism to promote your story.
Which is very common.
Yes, and that felt wrong to me. Even though my mind and my feelings inside were in conflict at the time, yes, I was feeling shame and regret during the interview, mortified, just really traumatized.
It's interesting you say that because, usually people people tend to not process their feelings until after something is complete. But the fact that you're saying that you felt it during is a really powerful statement. Abigail, what about you? Do you remember the first time you shared your lived experience with the world, and what feelings did you have with that?
To be honest with you, this is actually the first time I'm sharing something with the world, because I've always said to myself, I don't want people to know what I've been through, because I feel like when people know things about you, especially things that makes you vulnerable, they see you differently. Because I've witnessed people that happened to. So I'm like, okay, I don't want to be in that place. I think, and just the process of going through this, I think what also made me two things that made me most not want to share is dealing with law enforcement and lawyers. And I think having to say my story over and over again. And especially law enforcement. I remember an incident happened to me while I was in the process of my survivor. Something happened to me that happened with a friend, and the police had to get involved. But I went with my lawyer at the time. We went to the police station, and I had to give the side of my story. And at first I didn't want to go. And my lawyers was like, oh, you have to, this is the process, just go. So the fact of me hearing you have to, I went. And the police officer was like, oh, the lawyer cannot come inside the room. She has to stay outside. So I, right there and then, I did not feel comfortable going in there. First of all, they were so intimidating. Second, I was there, I felt like I was just this small, tiny thing that's in the middle of these big, huge, intimidating people. And all the questions were, what did you do wrong for this to happen?
First, I want to say, I am honored. I'm sure Gina is honored that you are here and have decided to share anything with us today. So thank you for your courage and your bravery to even take the first step. I think we both and survivors everywhere can relate to the first time that they decided to say anything, even if they didn't disclose the details, just coming out and saying like, I have lived experience or I survived. Like that's a huge step. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Second, I'm listening to what you're saying, and I just want to say to our audience, if you have not checked out our previous episode about law enforcement and listening to some of those issues, definitely check that out. It's super interesting to me when I sit with different guests all the time, and we all end up saying something that relates. And I'm like, we have so much in common. We have similar experiences even without knowing each other. And, law enforcement is a big part of my lived experience. So it's interesting to hear that. And this is actually a good place to move into my next question, because I think both of you just started to touch on this a little bit. Can you both tell me about a time where you felt pressure to disclose more than you wanted to, and that was outside of your comfort zone, right? So I'm hearing, Abigail, with you had a lawyer, and when people said, you had to say something, or you have to say it this way. You felt like you had to do that. And Gina, I'm hearing they didn't prep you for these very intimate questions that they were going to ask you. And even if they did prep you, it's still not appropriate, right? And there's this feeling that we all go through as survivors who are newly exited, of not having somebody, like you said, to handhold and tell you, no, you have rights, no, you have boundaries, no, you have this. And we get pressured to say what we think the audience wants to hear, or we want to give in to that sensationalization because we think that's the only way that they'll understand the hurt. So can either one of you talk about a time when someone else has pressured you to say more than you really wanted to say?
I think for me, what I learned early on was the wrong way. And what I learned along my journey doing this was that in the beginning, I was giving out details, more details than I needed to or the audience needed to hear.
That part.
And what I learned, my takeaway from it, and I learned it the hard way, and I'm always advocating to make sure that anyone knew that has this placed upon their heart and their mind to want to do this work, that they need to be properly educated and aware of what they're walking into, because you want to take control of your narrative. And we are more than our stories. Most people say, well, a lot of times they'll do the victim blaming. Well, why didn't you leave? It's like, forget about why didn't I leave.
And Abigail, you just said that, right?
Yeah, why did she or why did he do what they did to me? That's what the question should be, not about why didn't you leave, or how could you have loved those who are hurting you? Yes. It's like, so the questions were based on the information I was sharing. So I've learned along the way to use good discernment as to what's important to share. What do I want the audience to take away? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't start with human trafficking. There's layers upon layers. Mm-hmm. And I usually ask, well, what is the message you want to know? Mm-hmm. And what do you know about human trafficking before I'm going to allow you to interview me? Mm-hmm. So I took a 360-degree turnaround, and I took control before I agreed to any interview today. I want to know what it's about. What's the message you're trying to send to the audience, how I can support you? Mm-hmm. And what do you know about human trafficking? Because if I'm going to take a chair at your table, I want to know what you know about human trafficking. And if you say, well, I really don't know much about it, and then for me it's going to be more like, okay, I can offer you a 101, mm-hmm. A crash course on human trafficking, and to be survivor informed. And you don't have to be a survivor to be survivor informed, but to do this work and work with victims and survivors, yes, you do need to be survivor informed. Mm-hmm. And what that looks like, it looks like about what the language is, what's appropriate, what's not. Mm-hmm. You can't re-exploit or re-victimize someone that has gone through that and is still, trauma doesn't go away. We know that.
At all.
So there's so many layers upon layers here. And for me, it's like, also, even after you have that awareness and that foundation of human trafficking, okay, what are your questions? We could play around with the questions. It doesn't have to be so straight line, it could be like flexible where we're going off into a different direction. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about what we're both going to expect.
Exactly.
And I'm happy because I've said no a lot of times now. Mm-hmm. And I was glad I said no, And then there are times that I said yes, and I was glad I did. Mm-hmm. And so it's a learning curve.
Absolutely. I love that. Abigail, you're also in a very unique position because this is new for you. So when we're talking about survivors who are newly exited and new to public speaking and the work and talking about their lived experience, this is who you are right now. Mm-hmm. Would you say that you have so far in this very young journey of yours, have you experienced people pressuring you to this point to try to give more details that you didn't want to?
Yes, so many times I have people tell me, "Oh, your story is exceptional. You have to share your story. You have to." I'm like, no, because I've learned, like you said, like know what you are able, know if you can share, if you're not able to share, and also know your audience, like people around you, people usually don't know. Like, for example, when I first entered my trafficking, and when I first exited, I was very young. I was in school, and is surrounded by people who didn't know how to do with serious stuff. My peers didn't know how to deal with serious things. So I could not talk to them about things that happened to me because it was too serious. It was too serious for me myself. So, you know, and they will ask you a question instead of asking you, "Oh my God, like, how are you feeling? How are you doing with all of this?" The question would be like, "Wow, at 12 years old? So how did you do this? How did you go from this to this? How did..." I'm like, okay, that's not the point of like, how did I leave my situation? How did I how did you survive without money at 12 years old? I'm pretty sure you couldn't work. Like, those are the type of questions people ask you instead of asking you, "Wow, like, are you okay?" Like,
Right.
just kind of checking in. And I didn't blame them because they don't know. Like, the education is not there.
Abigail, something interesting that you just said was, and this is a point that I don't think I even thought about. Depending on your age, but I mean in general, but specifically, I was young, you were young. We don't talk about how peers don't peers are harmful. We all know kids can be very harsh sometimes, but when you're 12, 13, you feel like you can't go to your parents with this information. You feel like you don't really have an adult figure that you could run to with this. And then you have your friend groups, which as a preteen teenager, that's your social life. And that's usually who you run to when you can go to adults. But they're not equipped with the language, the education, the awareness around this issue, let alone know how to console somebody after. So that was just a very interesting point. I want to jump a little bit because something that comes to mind in my own journey is just remembering that it took me so long to know what I had to disclose and what I didn't. The questions that would come to my mind would be things like, will I only be believed if I tell every detail of my story? When people ask me about what I've gone through, is it only the salacious details that matter? Do I have to tell you all the intimate parts in order for you to believe that this is happening? A lot of times it's really hard for people to fathom that you can be a survivor of anything or a victim of anything if it's not big, dramatized, sensationalized, like we were saying. So, it became really difficult for me over the years, and it took a long time to get out of this mindset of knowing that I can tell my story with the details I want to or don't want to, and I don't have to say everything. We call this trauma porn, right? We this idea that I can't just make a statement and say, I'm a survivor of human trafficking. I have to say I'm a survivor of human trafficking, and I was raped 10 times a day by X amount of people and XYZ. So, Gina, I want to jump to you. Do you remember the first time that you knew that you didn't have to give trauma porn for folks? Or when did you realize that that wasn't necessary?
It's been a learning process for me, but I will tell you from now, since I would say 2017, it's been a 360-degree turnaround.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look back and I'll hear some of my testimonies, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
it's like not even the same person. And I just opened up myself and just poured out all the trauma and the trauma porn, like you said. And I realized that probably, I would say, over the past several years, I've seen a significant change because it's a process. And it's a journey that is ongoing. And it took me even some time to step back And also when I'm not participating, I will be a listener, and I will go and listen, whether it's to support other survivor brothers and sisters, or whether it's to go and just be there and hear them or learn whatever it is I want to be there for. And I'll hear them, and I'll pick things up that I do and I say, and then I'll pick things up that I can take away, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. That's what I do. That's what I say. Or I'll say, wow, I should try doing it that way. So I learn so much when I'm just sitting back and I'm hearing other brothers and sisters present. And I still hear a lot of amazing leaders get up there, and I feel that they're saying too much. But that's they're in control. We are all in control. And just because they may say too much, in my opinion, it doesn't mean it doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
They may be very comfortable and okay with that. I'm not. It didn't work for me. It was like, I can't continue doing this work and just throwing every detail out there.
Right.
That's not the message I want to send. So when people ask, we would like you to present, we would like you to keynote, we would like you to be a part of a panel, whatever that may look like, I'm very careful now, you know, what I choose to agree to. I'm very careful as far as, now it became a comfort. I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with questions because I'm in control, like Abigail shared. It's, you know, I don't have to answer if something feels uncomfortable. It's okay to say, I'm not comfortable answering that. It's okay.
This brings me to my next point. And I want to talk a little bit about redirecting the conversation. I wholeheartedly support what you were just saying about this idea of knowing what you want your message to be. And I think when we talk about boundaries, especially when it comes to telling your story, sharing lived experiences, advocacy, it all comes down to messaging. And this works in public speaking. We see this in TED Talks, all of these different things, right? As survivors, we are constantly picked on, targeted, chosen, tokenized for these intimate details in our story, right? So do either one of you have any tips and tricks on how to redirect the conversation when somebody asks you something that you don't want to answer? And this could be, you know, a boss, one of your friends, right? Like I said before, you can't just say that you're a survivor of something or that you've lived through something. Most people want to know more because naturally we're just curious, right? But oftentimes the questions that come after are some of the questions that you both have gotten already. You know I've gotten a bunch of inappropriate and intimate questions. So what are some tips or tricks that you guys might have for folks who might want to know too many details when you're not comfortable answering that? And this could be, Gina, something you've seen work in your experience. And Abigail, this can be something that you might start practicing in the near future.
I've seen it in both my personal and my professional life, where I've had family say, well, you know, I know it's probably hard because of the choice you made, or, you know, some different things. And, you know, like you shared, Abigail, sometimes we can't really judge what people are asking if it's ignorance, if they just don't know. And this is why even what you're doing, Melanie, with the education, and you're bringing awareness. And when you're bringing awareness, that's the core of what is important in all of this, regardless of what the issue may be. And between what you had shared and what Abigail shared, we sometimes can't, I'm not giving people a ticket, that it's okay. But I use it now. Instead of getting angry, I use it as an opportunity to educate. If you think rape is a choice, you are dead wrong. And I'll be happy to discuss this further after I cool down, of course. This is not a choice. Rape is not a choice. I'll tell, it just flares so many emotions with me, because I can handle it now. I really can. But it just opens up a wound. And like I said, I can't get angry at whoever it is asking because they don't know better.
Right.
Okay. But it is each of our responsibility to use that as an opportunity to educate and get to the core of the truth. People just say things like that are just so off
And awful.
and awful. Yes, yes. And you just feel like you're being stripped down to nothing. And it's like a reinforcement. And this is why I find it so critical, so important. I don't care how far or how little time or a lot of time I've been doing this work. It's so important for me to constantly be mindful of what I'm saying yes to and what I'm not saying no to. For instance, I've had attorneys drill me of details, but it was important. It was for my best interest. And why was it for my best interest? Because in order for them to help me, in order for them to help me get rid of my convictions, I needed to get into like the core
nitty-gritty.
of all the ugly as much as I could remember for them to help me.
Right.
So I think we need to use really good discernment as to who is asking, why are you asking? But I don't get up there and talk about all details anymore. I feel it's so important that anytime we are called upon, it's important to use that opportunity to talk about the demand, to talk about the accountability of the buyers, of the traffickers. You know, you don't need to know. You want to know about what happened, what it's like? It's like you're being stripped of your humanity. You're being stripped of your respect and your dignity. You're being stripped down to nothing because you're nothing. You're nothing but a commodity. And so that's why this needs to be redirected on who is doing what to us and why are they getting away with it.
So I want to divert from the question for a quick second. You mentioned something that I think is super powerful, and you mentioned reinforcements. And I just want to hone in on that for a second, right? Because what folks don't understand is that when they ask you these intimate questions and details, it's not only triggering because now you have to relive those moments, right? But you said that it made you feel small. Earlier, Abigail, you said that it made, like, you were in this room and you just felt like a tiny little thing. And I want the public, our listeners, people who work with us, all of the above, to know what that feeling is like, that moment of just asking. Like, I know, for example, for me, the main question I get when I start speaking is, how many people were you forced to sleep with a night? That is none of your business. But separate from it not being a necessary detail, now you're making me think about how many people it was. And now I feel small, right? And we don't want to continue to further stigmatize or re-traumatize the individuals that we're choosing to work with. So I wanted to throw that tidbit in there. But going back to the question, Gina, what I'm hearing you say in terms of tips for redirection are two main things. One of them being to know your audience and ask yourself, are these intimate details necessary for what my message is or for what the circumstance is? And I also heard you say to use, instead of getting angry, use that unacceptable, inappropriate question as a time to educate. And am I getting that correct?
Yes, yes.
Go ahead, Abigail.
Yeah. So just picking up on what Gina said, to be honest with you, I got to the point where, like, I am angry. I am.
And that's okay.
I'm angry not because, like, I'm angry at myself or the situation, but I'm angry in, like, you have to know, first of all, you have to know yourself. Like, know yourself and know the stage you are at. So Gina mentioned sometimes you have to tell your story. You have to tell everything for the lawyers because that's what's needed for you to get the services or whatever it is that you need. And I think it's also up to them to know what is necessary for them to know. Are these questions, do they really need to ask this, or are they just asking for the benefit of asking or knowing? Because asking someone, hey, like, what did he do to you at night? Like, I don't need to give all that detail, because you don't need to put all that detail on papers just to prove that what I'm saying is true or is not true. So I think it's up to them also to kind of reframe and like, I don't know, just manage how they ask questions and the things that's necessary for them to know and not to know. Just to not re-traumatize the person. That's okay, I think, for them asking, because it's something that they need to know for me to get the things that I need. But if it's someone that's outside, especially for someone who just got out of this situation, I will tell you, you don't have to educate anyone. I don't have to educate you. You think it's okay for someone to be raped 10 times a night?
You know, and I think both of these perspectives that you both bring are both valid, right? On the one hand, it's important to educate our peers, mentors, people we work with, right? Because we want them to know the truth and the realities and the harms that the system of prostitution and human trafficking causes on us, on our communities, and who better to teach them than the people who've lived through it. On the other hand, I also very much support the idea of not exhausting yourself, because you don't have to educate yourself. You're not responsible for the education of everybody else, right? And it's tiring. Like, I do this because this is what I love to do. And I want folks to hear what it's like in the real world, right? And what it truly looks like, not with TV or whoever else teaches us. But in having this conversation about boundaries, that's also a boundary. You don't always have to be the one to educate. You can take a rest. You don't need to continue to be the person that they call on for all the education. You don't have to do those things. So both points are valid here. And I just want to emphasize that.
Yeah. And I also think like, I can sit in this podcast and talk about my story and educate people. In my line of work, I can educate people and talk to them. So it comes back to knowing your audience. But if it's, for example, I don't say this often, but my family don't know what happens to me. I chose not to tell. They know a little details, people close to me, like my brothers and people that are a little bit close to me. But I chose not to tell them because I know they would never understand. They're not going to understand. So why would I waste time to explain to them and try to tell them? Not because, like, I understand, because where we're from, that's normal to them. Here is seen as trafficking. To them, it's like, this is normal. Life, it happens to so many people. So me trying to educate them and be like, hey, actually, this is not normal. It's like just me knowing the answer that I will get from them. So I just chose not to tell them anything at all, because there's no point of me doing that, So I think knowing your audience, knowing people that you're talking to, and also know what you are capable of at that time and how it makes you feel, I think that's very important as well.
True.
I just want to say for our audience, if there are any survivors that are interested in starting a advocacy journey that might be listening to this, know that in no way, shape, or form are we saying that you have to tell your story to your family or that you don't. But I love, Abigail, as you're speaking, you're naturally coming up with ways to practice boundaries. You're naturally saying, and I think that sometimes, especially when you become a survivor leader and you do public advocacy, I think there's this like idea in your head that because you're telling the public and you're a public figure, or because you do media interviews with the news, or because your story is going to be written on Google somewhere, that you still have to disclose because it's already out there. And that's not true. You can do whatever you want, right? You can speak, you can talk to a school, you can, write a blog about it, and you still don't have to answer questions about it, and you still don't have to tell people. So just to wrap up this question, I want to ask, right, when it comes to family and friends, right, because we talked a little bit about how to practice your boundaries with external factors, but it's always harder to practice boundaries when it comes to people that are in your immediate life. So, Gina, I'll start with you. Like, when it comes to families or friends that either know a little bit of the details but don't know everything, or they don't know about it and they find out about it but want to keep asking you about it and they won't stop, how do you practice boundaries there? Do you flat out just say no, or like stop, or I'm not answering that, or stop asking me, or do you take a more subtle approach? Or have you not yet? How does it work for you?
No. First of all, my family, they know what they think they know. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so the extent of our conversation is when they need to continuously reinforce that I should be ashamed of myself. Ugh. For speaking about this, for talking about this, for bringing the darkness into the light. Mm-hmm. And it probably was maybe even 6 months ago where my husband told me, I ran into so-and-so and was really surprised, but he said, you should be ashamed of yourself, mm-hmm. Speaking of the family, that this happened to you. First of all, I don't need to speak and go around and point fingers. Mm-hmm. He did this to me, she did that to me, and, blah, blah, blah. Do I want to give a snapshot? Yes. Do I need to give names? No. And I worked hard to find my truth and my identity and my freedom. And I am not about to hand that back over to anybody, mm-hmm. anybody at all. Mm-hmm. In the past, I would defend myself, and that fighting girl would come out, that defiant, that spiteful. I'd just spit you up and throw you out and, struggle with that disassociation, don't get too close, mm-hmm. Or be excused and always being accused and always feeling that I needed to defend myself because what you were saying was wrong. Mm-hmm. But defending myself, even though I could have been right, I would end up wrong because of my behavior. Mm-hmm.
So instead of defending yourself, what do you do now? You just don't respond?
I don't respond.
And that's okay. I love it.
That
respond. Is a tip.
I don't need to respond to something that has no validity. Mm-hmm. That doesn't belong to me. That's like giving you the keys to my car to drive me crazy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not about. But I also need to stop at times when I hear something, see something, and feel a certain way, and just know, does this belong to me?
Right.
Is this a battle that I'm willing to fight? Because not every battle belongs to us. Mm-hmm.
Protect your peace at all costs.
Yes. Protect your peace.
Abigail, what about you when it comes to family or friends?
So when it comes to family or friends, like I mentioned before, I don't talk to my family because I came from a background where it's like suck it up and move on. Mm-hmm. That's what they believe in. You have to suck it up and you have to move on. So I feel like there's nothing for me to explain to them. My family actually see me as someone who's crazy, who's just out there doing whatever. They don't know what I have come against. They just see me as this person who she just does whatever she wants. But that's not, I've been through hell for the past few years and they don't know. I pick up the phone, I talk to them, everything is normal, everything is fine. So I don't really explain to my family. My brother knows. My brother is the one who helped me throughout so much process, and even how to get out of my situation. My brother was there for me. But anyone else, I don't explain. When they see me, people see me smile. I'm always smiling. I'm always, that person. I have friends who told me, you must have rich parents. Like, you always dress well. You look well, you're always smiling, you're always at the gym. I'm like, maybe I do. So when it comes to friends and family, I don't really disclose anything to them because I've watched when I was in college, I can never pronounce her name. Chinua something. She did a TED Talk on the danger of single story. So since I watched that, and it's like true, like I have this story that people who knows that about me, that's how they see me. They see me as someone who's a victim, someone who's a survivor. But that's not my story. That's part of my story. That's one story of my stories. You know, I have so much more to me. I'm a school grad. I'm someone who works very well. I'm someone who's friendly. I have so many stories, and I would like people to know that about me. But when it comes to being there, advocating and helping survivors, I use my survivor story because that's what's needed at that time. But to anyone else who doesn't know to need that story about me, I have so many more stories that they can know about me that doesn't have anything to deal with me being a survivor or a victim of human trafficking. So that's one thing. And I also feel like there are environment that you are in situation you are in, the fact that you being a survivor or you having to deal with this puts you in a corner where you don't know what to do anymore when it comes to workplaces. When it comes to, I had it was a small interview that is leading to a bigger interview, but a question was asked to me and I didn't know how to answer it. And I felt backed into a corner of telling them why. So the person asked me, when did you graduate from high school? So I told them when I graduated from high school. And the second question was like, why did you have this gap time before going to college? So for me to get the job or to even have an interview, I have to tell them, because I was in a situation that didn't allow me to go to college, because I felt like if I tell them, I just needed some break, like, she's just like, one of those lazy person that don't. Right. So I felt like I had to tell them for them to understand why I have to take that gap time, why I did not go to college during when I graduated from high school to the year that I actually went to college. So I told the recruiter, and when I hang up the phone, and but he was like, "Oh wow, that's you've been through a lot. Like that's understandable." But when we finished the conversation, I was like, "Wow, I can't believe I just said that." That was like how I felt. And I also have experiences where in a workplace, when they know, especially workplaces that are nonprofit organization that help survivors of human trafficking, usually you disclose that in order for you to be qualified for the job. And I felt like I got to the point where I don't even want to work for those organizations or work with those organizations anymore, because when you're doing your job, something small happens to you. It's like, is it because of your situation that you can't perform your job right now? That doesn't have to do anything with my job or my performance. Like, that about me, true, but you don't have to bring it up anytime that I'm not feeling well, I'm feeling overwhelmed. So I feel like it just depends of your audience and where you are. It's up to you to what you want to disclose and what you don't want to disclose.
So overall, what I'm hearing, and this is the importance of this episode, right? Because we know that when you don't practice boundaries or set them, things like that happen. You get labeled. You're seen as weak or vulnerable or unreliable. We know that there's stigma attached to our journeys. We know that our journeys are not linear, and because it's not linear, it's not considered normal or average. So what I'm hearing in terms of boundaries, I'm hearing to know your audience. I'm hearing you don't have to educate or answer. I'm hearing do practice educating others if they don't know and they're ignorant, if you have the capacity to do so. I'm hearing that you don't have to tell your family or friends just because they're your family or friends. You don't have to disclose to anybody in a workplace type of setting. But do share what you want to share about your own personal journeys, and make sure that you get to your messaging and stick to that, and not the messaging of what other people want you to stick to. Am I getting all of that?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think that's such a great point you brought out, because there's so much more. I know for me, there's so much more to me than what happened to me.
I think that's why we're doing this podcast in general, right? Because we need the
Absolutely.
world to know who we are.
Yes.
We need the world to know how insidious the things that we have gone through is. But that on the other side of this, when we talk about survivor leadership, we're more than just what happened to us, right? We're multifaceted, we're talented, we're intelligent, and we want the world to know that we're all of those things after conquering such a difficult roller coaster of a journey, right? Exactly. When we talk about this difficult roller coaster, I know for me, anytime I speak somewhere publicly, or, you know, even internally, if I'm speaking to just a couple of people, there are times when it's a lot. You have to decompress after it, right? Because we know that no matter how prestigious or esteemed or how seasoned you are as a advocate or not so seasoned, it always affects you, no matter how much you've healed. And I always tell people when we talk about the healing journeys that it's a lifelong process. I think a lot of times people want to check off a box saying like, okay, I've made it to X amount of healing, so I'm done now. Like, it doesn't work like that, right? So for me, I know that anytime I'm speaking, I need to go somewhere and find something to do for myself to decompress. What are some things that you guys do to decompress after sharing your story?
For me, one thing has always helped is go to the gym. If I can't punch someone in the face, I may as well punch the bag. So, I go to the gym, just let it out. Just let it out, let it out, let it out. And one thing I taught myself, and to be honest with you, like, I appreciate my journey. I appreciate the fact that people hearing it, it's like, what is she talking about? But like, going through this had made me learn so much about myself, and I've learned so much about people that I'm pretty sure if I did not, I wouldn't. Especially from the age that I got into this, and my age right now, so many people that are my age don't know things that I know, things that I've been through. So I appreciate that so much. And just the fact that knowing it's okay not to be okay. Like, it is totally okay. I wake up in the morning and I don't feel like doing anything. It's like, you know what? I just want to be in bed. If I want to cry, I'll cry. If I want to just sit in front of the TV and just put all the work on the side and just watch TV or do whatever, that's fine. It's okay not to be okay. I think learning that just kind of made me stronger.
And always remember that it's okay to rest. I think we always think we need to be on go, and we start to feel bad about ourselves if we take a break. We're just like, no, I need to be working or doing. It's okay to rest.
Yes.
Gina, what do you do to decompress after sharing your story?
I do a lot in between. Well, I love writing, and I love doing artwork. In fact, writing is what is bringing my book, soon to be, A Survivor's Secrets. And I learned through my writing that these were not my secrets, but these were secrets that were part of my shame and fear, that I was holding on to the world's secrets. And it was like through my journey of faith that brought me to the truth. And that truth has brought me to, why am I keeping secrets that were done, that were violated against me? So that was a great healing for me that has been part of my journey. And along with that, I cherish my immediate family. My husband, my daughters, my little grandkids, my faith. I love my faith that I continue to cultivate in God, that has continuously brings me through difficult days, that there's days, like you said, that I'm not always okay, whether it's when I'm speaking or not. But I do try to give myself space and boundaries when I'm going to do something and when I'm not. But I love walking. I love my free spirit.
I'll tell you mine.
Yes, I was
Childhood cartoons are what doing for me. If I'm feeling low, angry, I'll order food because I have no energy to cook at that point. Usually a pepperoni pizza, thin crust, of course, and I throw on SpongeBob, and I just crawl up in a bed and recite all the lines from SpongeBob to just bring myself back to center. So
I love SpongeBob.
I love it. My family, I can recite, I think, almost every line from every episode back in the day.
I use that line whenever people are like, oh, I'm sorry, what can I do? I'm like, move to another neighborhood. It's like,
You see, it sticks with you. So, I think just to recap everything, it's important to remember that you never have to disclose, and you have the right to not disclose. Mm-hmm. You also have the right to disclose as much as you want, but make sure you do it on your own accord, and that nobody else pressures you or forces you to do that. For survivors that are listening that are newly exiting and don't really know where to start, or they want to get into advocacy, or they want to start sharing their story, remember that you do have options. Know your audience, know when the circumstance calls for these intimate details, such as what you were saying about lawyers and your case. But know that there are some people that are just curious, quite frankly, just nosy, that want to know the intimate parts, and you don't have to share that. Learn that if you are talking to friends or family, you don't have to say those things just because they're your blood. I tend to find that families and friends are not the most helpful in the beginning of your healing journey processes. They tend to be some of the hardest people to confront when you're healing. Yes. So to protect your peace, we're not going to do that. I'm hearing that just because you're in a certain work environment, or just because you're trying to get a job, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to tell these people anything. And when somebody asks you about discrepancies in your timeline, or why did you have so many years apart, you don't have to tell them any of that. It's not their business. I'm also hearing that there is an importance in saying no or stop. And I think I want to close out with that. When anybody goes through any form of sexual violence in any way, no and stop are oftentimes the words that we struggle to say. When we talk about boundaries overall, we forget that the best place to start instilling and ingraining this is in childhood. Yes. And I want any parents or anybody that works with children that might be listening to this to know, the earlier you start instilling boundaries, the easier it is as an adult to be able to adopt. A lot of us struggled with these boundaries in the family, in the home, as children, that now traffickers can pick up on how susceptible you are, how easy you are to manipulate, or who lacks boundaries and who doesn't. And we know, we can do a whole episode on that separately, but we always know when it comes to grooming tactics and recruiting tactics, traffickers can pick up and sniff out who doesn't have those boundaries instilled. So when we talk again about the importance of boundary setting, this is why this episode is so important. So, oftentimes we get so entrenched in this work and we never take enough time to just talk about something completely separate and focusing on the other parts of us as advocates. So Gina already knows this from our previous episode, but Abigail, I always want to end these episodes by asking folks how they use creativity as a form of resistance. So we do this work all the time. We're constantly fighting and getting into the advocacy and the public space. What is something that you do that's completely separate from all of that to bring yourself joy or peace?
Music. I don't know how to sing. But music, I love listening to music. I'm helping out people finding deals and putting themselves out there and getting deals with TVs and radio station. I think I still have that resource navigator in me. So I love music. I love going to concerts. So if I'm not doing this work, I'm focusing in music. Yes.
I love music too. I think we all can speak to that. Gina Cavallo, Abigail Dow, thank you both so much for joining me today. This was such a fruitful conversation and one that is so necessary. So thank you both for all that you do.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you for having us. And it was a pleasure to be here with you, Gina, and learn from you and hearing from your experience. It's been such a joy. Thank you, Melanie.
No, you guys are amazing. All of the survivors that come on here are so amazing. So for those of you watching, tune in next week where I will be joined by another fierce survivor leader where we're going to be talking about how to get your public speaking career started. Bye for now.